importance. They did experience some schedule compression, or actually it was resource compression. They had a resource get pulled off the test team, which before would have been a real problem, but they had some flexible handling options for that, and that allowed them to triage their tests and be effective and flexible in dealing with that resource constraint. And overall optimization of quality within the constraints due to the focused testing and an ability to talk about quality and quality risk with the key stakeholders and make an informed release decision. Now, some key points, some key lessons learned, things they wanted to do differently the next time. They wanted to include an even broader spectrum of business stakeholders. They felt that getting the impacts rated right was something that they needed even more focus on, and so that was something they wanted to do. In fact, they were even thinking of something that was fairly radical, which was inviting some of their beta test customers, who were real reliable customers, to participate in the process. So, obviously that entails a certain maturity level in the people involved, the customers involved. They can't look at it as an opportunity to beat people up, but it could very well work for them. They also wanted to start the risk analysis earlier in the life cycle. They wanted to start it in parallel with the requirement specification phase, which on a sequential life cycle model is definitely what you want to do. You maximize the benefits if you do that, particularly some of the side benefits of identifying problems in the requirements, but also just having the tests written in risk order ensures that the greatest amount of attention is given to the most important tests. So the overall conclusion at CA was that risk-based testing would allow them to deliver increasingly sophisticated and complex products, which we're all called upon to do. Products get more sophisticated and more complicated over time generally. But we all also called upon to deal with tightening constraints, particularly now, the financial situation, and that risk-based testing helped them deal with the constraints. And it allowed them to really prioritize testing and quality and balance that against the other priorities. So they're sold on it. As I said, we've done a number of risk-based testing pilots for CA at other locations around the world, and they're a big promoter of it, and I think a big success story of it just in general. And it's been very successfully deployed there, though. Of course, we have successfully deployed it with a number of other clients as well. So this is not just a technique that only people in the enterprise software development business can do. We have clients that are banks and video game companies and a whole spectrum of capabilities and domains and so forth that are using this. So definitely a robust and useful technique, and I hope that this webinar has given you some ideas on how to apply it yourself. That concludes the presentation. And so at this point, as always, we'll have a 30-minute Q&A period for those of you who want to submit questions. There are questions that can be submitted via the webinar Q&A feature here. So let me get the questions up here and see what we've got. Let's see, we had a couple questions or comments saying that people were having difficulty hearing me. I'm afraid that's really not under my control. Hopefully you can all hear me now. But that can be, something can happen on your end in terms of the voice over IP coming down. So so you can occasionally get some kind of weird chipmunking sounds or so forth. So I hope that hasn't been too much of an issue for everybody. Let's see, got a question from Gayatri. How is risk-based testing applied for performance testing? Well, basically, risk-based testing spans all of the different test types, including performance testing, and you would be able to identify risk items related to performance, and then your tests would be focused on those based on the level of risk, as I mentioned before. So really, it's perfectly usable for that type of testing, but it's also really beyond that because the risk categories include performance, but also go beyond it to look at other things. Now, you could do a risk analysis where you focus just on performance-related risks, and then in that case, it's basically going to determine what you're going to test and how much. But I would really encourage you, unless there's a specific reason why you're just focusing on one risk category, to actually look at the broader range of risk categories. Okay, I got a question from Sarah here. How to apply risk-based testing if we are hand-in-hand with requirements? If we don't have all the requirements defined, how to establish what is more risky or not? Okay, this is a good question, Sarah, and I'm glad that you brought it up. Risk-based testing can use the requirements as an input, as we saw in the case study. But you do not have to have a set of requirements in order to make this work. In fact, we have implemented this for clients where there was not a written requirement specification. In fact, there was no requirement specification at all, and there never was one. And then what happened then is that the experience and shared vision of what the product was to do was present in the stakeholders who are participating in the process, risk-based testing, the risk analysis process. And so that worked perfectly well. Now, I assume that there is going to be some number of risk items that you might not identify in an underspecified situation, but you'd be surprised at how few new risk items are identified when you go through and look at your risk items against the specifications when you go through that part of the process. Usually it's pretty small incremental amount. So I would encourage you to look at risk-based testing as a strategy that can be applied, especially in underspecified situations. So if that's what you're dealing with, then this is a tool to help you deal with that, because it gives you a test basis in a situation where you otherwise wouldn't have one. And now, if you do have requirements, you might be saying, well, why do I need to do this? Because if I've got the requirements, I just use the requirements as a test basis. But notice that the requirements-based testing is a brittle testing strategy in a lot of ways. I mean, if your requirements, where the requirements are wrong, the test will be wrong. Where there are holes in the requirements, you'll have gaps in your testing. The requirements typically cannot tell you how to allocate test effort or how to sequence your tests unless you happen to get very detailed prioritization of requirements. But what we typically see with a lot of our clients is, yeah, the requirements are prioritized, but everything's a priority one, so that's not particularly useful. The requirements can't tell you how to triage your tests either. So, the addition of risk-based risk analysis and levels of risk and so forth on top of the requirements is very helpful. So basically, if you have the requirements, what you're pursuing is a blended risk-based and requirements-based testing strategy, and we find that works quite well. Let's see, I got a question from C's here. Do you have experience with risk-based testing on a breakdown of functionality? Let's see. Breakdown of functionality. Okay, I assume, C's, what you mean is going by functional areas rather than by risk categories. That is an approach that you sometimes see in certain formalized approaches for risk-based testing when applied to hardware or something like that. If you read Stamatis' book on failure mode and effect analysis, you'll see that's a technique that he talks about. Now that is not something that I would recommend here. You really do want to look across all of the categories and try to identify risks in all of those areas, because otherwise the